My next question is, we're going to move into the world of Surimono, is for Sadako. Can you tell this audience, not everyone is a Surimono aficionado yet. Hopefully they'll become so. Can you tell us how they're created and for whom they're created, and what sets them apart from traditional ukiyo-e?
Okay. Surimono literally means printed things. But despite its very modest name, there's nothing modest about Surimono. Surimono are, in fact, intricately made, privately commissioned woodblock prints with gorgeous imagery and puzzling poems called kyoka. Surimono comes out of a collaboration among the poet, the artist, namely the image designer, the calligrapher, the woodblock carver, and the printmaker. It illustrates a highly nuanced and personal interplay between word and image. Here, in addition to the visual display of the fashionable, gorgeous kimono design of 1820s, Edo, present-day Tokyo, this image reveals to us that the woman is Sei Shonagon, the famous essayist of the pillow book, or the Makura no Soshi. She is portrayed rolling up the bamboo blind to view the snow outdoors, alluding to her knowledge of the famous Chinese poetic line by Bai Zhui, "How should we view the snow on Mount Xianlu?" The viewers of the first half of the 19th century, when Surimono were popular, most likely could identify this image as Ryobei or Ryubi, from one of the heroes in the immensely popular Chinese novel called Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or Sangokshi. Chinese themes are very popular at this time in Edo, with the growth of interest in Confucian thoughts and classical literature. Please also observe the printer's use of rich mineral pigments and the artist's clear attempt at evoking a Chinese mood. Next, please. Visual puns and clever image play were also a hallmark of Surimono. This enigmatic still life, for example, serves as a lunar calendar, or egoyomi, as the pink envelope at the lower left records the numbers of the long months, meaning 30 days per month in 1816. There's 4 complex characters at the central column. In fact, that the first 2 characters also tell us the name of the group, poetry group, Yomogawa, or 4 Directions group. This complex image clearly indicates the artist's curiosity with reflected images, as the porcelain bowl is reflected in the shiny black lacquer pillow stand. I must add here, still life as a subject was first launched in the genre of Surimono. In the 19th century, still life imagery had not yet to enter into the world of better known commercially produced ukiyo-e prints. As Surimono were produced in extremely small print runs and commissioned by exclusive audiences, the lavish use of costly metallic pigments such as gold, silver, brass, copper, and zinc became pervasive. Highly sophisticated and time-consuming printing techniques were also used on Surimono surfaces, such as polishing black lacquer with a boar's tusk to make it shine, as seen here on the black mirror stand. A special gaufrage called karazuri features elaborate embossing and debossing without any color or ink, making the best use of the thick and fiber-rich mulberry paper, as seen on the cat's fur. Here, the cat is shown frightened by its own reflection, but in Surimono, nothing is as simple as it seems. Indeed, her red tie-dye color, the color of a courtesan's undergarments, might lead the viewer to believe the animal represents a courtesan at her makeup table. Unlike most Surimono, which were created in Edo, this print was made in the Western region and in and around Osaka, where the artist Gakute worked for a period of time. Surimono's subject matter varies greatly. They include portraits of kabuki actors, the creatures of the seashore, birds, fish, and butterflies that illustrate the current popularity of the observing nature with some degree of scientific interest. The most pervasive subject matter for Surimono maybe, and we're talking about on the left, the 12 animals of the zodiac, as Surimono were largely issued for the new year. It was highly important in such a commissioned print to make reference to that zodiac animal. Here, the ox, the second of the 12, is designed by Kunisada, who is an artist known for his ukiyo-e prints depicting kabuki actors. The round red circle contains the artist's name, but it also serves an additional role representing the first rising sun in the new year. Typically, ukiyo-e artists were commissioned to make surimono. Among them, we have Hokkei, Hokusai, and Shuman. Hokusai, world famous for his 1830s print of the Great Wave, in his earlier years, was an incredibly sought after surimono artist. Here, no, you have to go back. Okay, we're talking about the one on the right. Here in this print, I was impressed by Hokusai's artistic sensitivity toward the precious time of childhood before flying into adult life. The Drosten and Kenadjian collection in the accompanying catalog features many works by these three artists, as well as Yashima Gakute and other prominent pupils of Hokusai, and many members of the Utagawa school, leaders of the ukiyo-e kabuki prints. Surimono, dating between the late 1810s and 1830s, represent the height of surimono production in both visual finesse and poetic intricacy. They present vignettes of the arts and culture of the time. But surimono production began to decline after 1830 due to the deaths of a few of the leaders of this genre, and more directly due to the economic impact of the tempo famine that devastated the publishing industry. So surimono represent Japan's last pre-modern literary and artistic burst before the arrival of the West and the forced modernity that followed in the Meiji era.
Thank you, Sadako. It's amazing what you compressed and how much information you put into those 6 minutes. Thank you very much. There's so much to know, and the examples you picked are absolutely glorious. The audience should be aware of, I don't know what size screen they're looking at, but these prints are only about 7.25 inches by 7.75 inches. So the quality of the printing is outstanding when you hold them in their hand versus seeing it on the screens. So next, I'd like to turn our attention to Adam and his relationship, his proclivity as a scholar of poetry. Can you tell us a little bit about the poetry clubs, which were the major commissioners of these rare works, and how, when, and why surimono were collected in Japan? Why were they produced, and for what purpose did they serve?
Thank you, Joan. Yes, so although the images themselves are, I think, a type of visual poetry, as you mentioned, surimono also, as a rule, contain actual poems. These were most often kyoka, or wild poems, which could be the more, I guess, typical of Japanese poetry, waka, which are 31 syllables and 5 lines, or the more familiar to Westerners, haiku of 17 syllables and 3 lines. But they were considered wild or unbound because, unlike conventional Japanese poetry, which built upon long-established topics and long-established language, stretching back over 1,000 years, actually the earliest printed material in the Japanese language is a compilation of poetry. A kyoka might address a familiar theme with a strikingly unfamiliar metaphor, or it might adapt familiar language to a funny or surprising topic. And the poems, usually 1 or 2, but as we can see on this Hokusai print, sometimes a lot more. I think the record for this collection is 27 on 1 print, are selected as sort of notable relics of a group poetry contest or a group gathering with some spontaneous poetry in these sort of kyokai or sort of wild parties. Or sometimes the poems were solicited as guest contributions, and you can see sort of upside down, but on the far left of this image, there is a little insignia, so marking a guest contributor. I believe it's Yomogawa no Uta Gaki no Magao. And so the poems themselves speak to the origins of the Surimono, which are tokens of the social life behind the prints. And the poetry in this collection ranges from sorry, there's a bit of road noise, from the encouragements you see here, written on the occasion of the actor Bando Mitsugoro's premiere of 2 new plays in Kyoto and Osaka, encouragements to for him to show the audiences down south the charms of an Edo actor and not get too comfortable and come back home soon. And they all sort of play on the charms of different scenes of famous sites in Edo, the snow in Musashino, the moon over the Sumida River, and the flowers in spring. To the muted poems on the next slide, next image. These muted poems of memorial on this subtle print by Kitsu in commemoration of a deceased friend and father, in which priests and his son and various friends from his poetry group gather on the Memorial Day after his death to offer these poems to him in the next world. To enticements, to visit a particular sweet shop while out viewing plum blossoms, and this print on the next slide of congratulations on the birth of an actor's son. You can see the father's poem at the top, very excited, very quick hand, but also very orderly hand, and all of the symbolism of a young child born in a monkey year. You see the monkey mask. There's also a hidden, the sort of bamboo, which is hung with gold coins, are actually a sort of hidden calendar. And it celebrates the birth of his son, a son who, in a print that appears later in this slideshow, writes his own poem on the occasion of his first performance carrying on the family trade. And I should note just in closing that while there's usually something of a flirtation between the poems and the picture, the two are not wedded. And so they're not always necessarily closely related or mutually descriptive. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I've always found the Kabuki Surimono to be the trickiest to figure out, and you're a wizard at it. And my hat's off to you. Really complicated imagery, more so than even the still lifes. My next question is actually for myself. There we go. I just wanted to give the audience a little context for collecting Surimono, particularly in America, and publications that have been done on them in English. America has really been a pioneer in this respect. One of the most well-known, and maybe for still life subjects, the most glorious collection is in 3 albums that are owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art that were put together by a dealer in Japan and Paris, Hayashi Tadamasa, and acquired by the Havemeyers, who gave it to the Met, which contains over 500 Surimono. And fortunately, these albums, which are beautifully designed and put together, remain intact. But that gives you an idea of how early Surimono were collected in this country and treasured by Americans who couldn't read a word of what they were looking at. Next slide. This has fostered a actually good library on the subject, most especially promoted by Roger Keyes, one of the greatest scholars on ukiyo-e in any language, with publications that have gone on for many decades that we all of us who are specialists rely upon with great regularity. Next slide. More recently, the publication that I did with John Carpenter on Frank Lloyd Wright's collection of Surimono that I alluded to earlier, and 2 publications done by Cornell University on 2 collections by women collectors that in part are now part of the Herbert F. Johnson collection and scholarship. And then I have to bring it to the parties here. You see a picture from Shawn Drosten in 2000 when we were there for the Ota Kinen Bijitsukan exhibition on Surimono. In order to do a show on Surimono in Japan, the loans had to come from outside because the Surimono had long left Japan in the before the 1880s. Reproductions were made. And even in that album we just saw from the Met, one of those prints is actually a facsimile. So in 1889, when those albums were put together, there still weren't enough Surimono to fill those albums. And museums in Japan have still to this day a paucity within their holdings. So I was asked to curate this exhibition with Surimono from Shawn, from Joanna Schoaf, whose catalog we just saw, and from Barbara Bowman's collection, which is now part of the Los Angeles County Museum, thanks to her philanthropy. And down below, I just wanted to throw in one of Shawn's earliest acquisitions. When we were living in Paris, I found it in Paris, a very rare Surimono by Utagawa Hiroshige. Like Hokusai, who is better known for his landscapes, early in his career did a few Surimono. Next slide. I also want to point out Patrick and Shawn, besides being great clients and great friends, are profoundly insightful collectors, because they will acquire Surimono like a curator would that are unusual, off the beaten track, not famous, and by artists that are not even well known within the ukiyo-e genre. For instance, Tani Bunsho, who is best known as a painter, and you can see his works in our next talk, as in the Feinberg collection, and well represented as a painter in the Feinberg collection. He too did receive the occasional commission for a Surimono. Or in the case of Utagawa Kuninao on the left, who's also an Utagawa school kabuki artist, here he's doing a no mask. And I believe to this date, this is the only known genuine impression of the Surimono. It's very well known by 1890s reproductions and facsimiles, but finding this real one, even though the condition isn't quite up to Shawn and Patrick's standard, its uniqueness made it a must-have for the two of them. Next slide.